Namaste. Thank you all for joining us online at the Bridge the Gap Yoga School. Today I'm going to walk you through the very basic introduction practice that I would invite everybody to do once a day at home, ideally first thing when you get up. And this practice is an extension of the 5 principles which we discussed in a previous video. And so I'll walk you through how to do the practice using the 5 principles, and we'll also talk about why this practice works from the standpoint of employing those principles. Because the practice itself is very basic and very simple, yet it invites an embodied experience, which is what we're after. We want our spiritual practice to be an embodied discipline and not something that takes us off into the higher realms necessarily, the realms that we end up creating distance between us and reality from. And so this discipline begins with our first principle: inhale above, exhale below. And so when we inhale, we feel the chest expand, we feel the lift of the rib cage, and the breath is received into the chest and the heart. And there's this lifting effect, right? And I keep that lifting effect as I exhale. And the belly pulls in, the navel moves slightly towards the spine, and there's this pressure, there's a strong or strengthening effect from the exhale. And eventually we even start to feel that belly moving in, and that strengthening effect of the exhale sends energy down into the legs. And this helps us become more grounded. And so we inhale above, exhale below, first principle. And we're just feeling that. That's why our hands are here. We're just feeling that breath. The vinyasa that we use is a very simple, just inhaling the arms overhead and exhaling, and the hands come down. And we'll do that a few times just to feel that movement. Inhale above, exhale below. One more. Just notice if there's any resistance that comes in, any sense of urgency, of a need to make it more complicated, of a need to rush. And we want to really soften away from those, because that's a mental tension, if you will. The second principle, breath is body movement. So when I'm doing this movement, I try to feel like my whole body is breathing. And I can even invite in, if you notice I'm creating like a softening with the knees and the legs. And if you notice the difference, it's like my whole body is breathing, right? So breath movement is body movement. Again, inhaling above, exhaling below. Especially as the arms come down, we want to pull that belly in, and that's going to help with the lowering of the arms. That protects the shoulders. And something that people often find here, especially when they're starting this practice, is the breath stops somewhere like here. Like we can't get the inhale all the way in without it closing off, and that's because this is happening. The shoulders end up constricting, and there's this tension. And that's just a reaction, right? We're carrying all these default mechanisms in our body based on years of wounds and trauma history, which also extends further back now that we have research in epigenetics to show that trauma actually has a transgenerational impact, which we won't get into now, but just knowing that our body is a storage container for a lot of these wounds, and that when we practice in such a way that it's emphasizing the healing effect. That's why the breath is so important. And it's to notice, oh crap, I can't actually move beyond this point without the breath closing off. Right? And so if I can learn to soften, learn to relax into my body, that's important, to relax into my body as I'm moving and as I'm breathing, and learn to enjoy that process without getting distracted, without needing to rush or to force. It makes such a simple, easy practice like this with the arms so profound and so healing. And it's so simple. It should feel so good that you have no choice but to do it, right? There's a yoga teacher that once told me, if the practice doesn't feel so good that you want to jump out of bed at 3 in the morning and do it, then it's not your yoga practice. So find a way as you breathe and move to make it feel like that. Like, oh my gosh, I just am really loving this experience right now. And if you have to, lift your arms to here, right? Don't lift your arms to here. Pause the breath, hold the breath, feel it constrict, and then try to finish the movement like that. That's not what we want to do. We want to create the healing effect of just feeling like the body itself is breathing. So that's number 2. The third principle, and this is where it starts to get more tricky, because the more of the mind must engage with the body in this experience. Third principle, breath movement. Breath encompasses body movement. And remember what I mean by that, and I said this in the first video, I start breathing before I start moving, so I'll just demonstrate. Breath continues after movement ends, and then I start breathing before I start moving. I keep breathing after movement ends. So it's like an envelope, right? The breath is like an envelope, and the body is existing within the breath. The body's movement is happening inside of the breath. And so there's a space at the beginning of the movement where it's only breath, and there's a space at the end where the body has stopped moving and the breath continues. And this starts to make us feel and perceive energy a lot more fully in our body, right? Our attention, our mind is really engaged inwardly, focusing on getting that breath to encompass our movement. And we'll notice that as we do this, if you do 2 or 3 of these, there'll be those times where the attention slips and we become less engaged in our practice. We're thinking about something else, we're not here now in this moment. And the breath will start to be right on the edge of the movement. And sometimes we initiate the movement and the breath at the same time. And that's a common thing in yoga, is to move and breathe at the same time. And what we're inviting for everyone to do and experience is what happens if you start breathing before you start moving. Okay? And what happens if you keep the breath going just a little bit longer after the movement has ended. And so explore that, especially in this movement here. Inhaling above, exhaling below. First principle still applies. Breath movement is body movement. Whole body's breathing. Second principle. Breath starts. Movement follows. Movement ends. Breath continues. Third principle. Breath encompasses movement. The fourth principle, there's 4 parts to the breath. The inhalation, the pause after inhale, the exhalation, and the pause after exhalation. And so what that looks like, and it was happening throughout that practice that we were just doing, but we're going to make an emphasis here. Notice that pause, that moment of just floating. And listen, right, with your body. Listen with your body to that space. Feeling the whole body, arms and feet. Pausing at the end of the exhale and feel. Listen inwardly. Right? Turn your mind, turn your inner gaze inward on itself. Notice with the heart and really perceive and feel yourself. Feel your body in the spaces between the breath. Notice what it's doing. And that creates a really profound stilling effect and balancing effect on the nervous system, which anybody who's advancing in the yoga practice, the meditation is the ultimate fruit, right? And we're creating these little moments of samadhi, which is a yoga Sanskrit word that has no direct translation, but it basically is our experience of wholeness, right? Our experience of yoga. The fruit of yoga is the samadhi, is the union that we feel that is like, right? That just, there's no word for that. That feeling of just being home in your body. And so that's the fourth principle. 4 parts to the breath. The fifth principle, the breath is the same between vinyasa and static. And so if I'm doing this arm circle movement, and then I come up and I pause, I say pause the breath or pause the shape. Can I keep the ratio, intensity, and duration of breath the same in that static position as it was during the vinyasa? And just being aware of what's happening inside of my body, feeling that same flow of energy as if I was still dynamic, still doing the vinyasa, yet the shape has become static. And so what that does for us is it invites in a full engagement and a full balanced energy flow into the static shape. Because a lot of times we get to static shapes and we disengage. Right? We start to hang on tissue, or we start to just collapse. And that happens a lot of times more in the seated postures, but it can also happen when we just start to like lean on our body and we lose the active engagement and the drawing up effect of the groundedness, right? Because that we feel that groundedness through the exhalation. Can we take that groundedness with us into the inhalation and stay with it? Right? Stay with the embodied experience you're having. So that's the fifth principle. All of these principles we're putting together in this single practice, and this is what we invite everybody to do once a day, first thing when you get up. 4 breaths, just 4 breaths. Inhale, arms go up. Exhale, arms go down. Do that 4 times. And can you do each of those breaths a little bit better than the last? Okay? Each of those breaths a little bit better than the last. And if you notice that you get to the 4th breath and your mind created, you were unable to use those principles in your body, maybe you do a little more. Maybe you have a few more breaths at the end. But all we're asking is just create an embodied spiritual practice, one that allows you to connect inwardly to yourself, employing these sacred principles, these breath-centric principles that keep us honest, that keep us engaged, keep us focused on what's happening in this immediate moment experience we're having, and it stops the buzz, right? Because the mind is just buzzing. Bring that buzz down. Create an experience that's you and you. And if you can do that every day, just 4 breaths, I promise you things will start to shift. This is how we start to heal our body. And when we start to notice where we're doing this practice and we're trying to rush, we're trying to force, we're trying to strain, we see where our mental patterns and our tendencies have crept in, and there's nothing that needs to be done about that. We don't need to fight to reclaim ourselves. We don't need to fight to heal. All we need to do is return to the practice. And then we talk a lot about returning to the breath, but how do we return to the breath? How do we make our yoga practice a breath-centric experience and honor the great tradition from which it is coming? Use these 5 principles, employ them into your practice, your daily breathing practice, breath and movement. And if you like, we'll be offering more of these videos for additional progression on someone's practice. However, we'll pause this video now and just say thank you so much for engaging in your practice. 4 breaths, a 4-breath vinyasa with the arm circles, using those 5 principles. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for tuning in. Om Namaste.